This week I've been thinking a lot about rules. I'm not really a rules kind of guy, as you'd probably noticed. And but I'm just right in the middle of doing a course on complexity theory. Yeah, like what's a team coach doing a course on complexity theory? Here's the reason why: is because I've increasingly come to realize that the teams I've been working with and the context that they're in cannot be explained, or they cannot solve the problem just through applying a linear consulting approach. So here's the typical linear consulting approach, right? What's the problem? What's the context? What's the problem? What are all the solutions? Let's generate solutions. Let's prioritize them, choose one, implement the action plan, result, happy days. Now, what I'm realizing is that when I run that process, mostly with teams, that it falls a bit flat. And it falls flat because the reality is that the system they work in is actually more complex than that. There's a lot more moving parts, and they're in the system, and every time they're working within it, they're changing it. So what I want to talk to you about today is the nature of systems that you're in. And if they're human systems, if they're social systems where people are interconnecting with one another all the time, they're more like complex systems that are continually changing, as humans are. And so when it comes to setting rules for those systems, it's really important that you're aware of the impact of those rules on the behavior that it creates and how it constrains behavior, but also creates freedom in people. So let me talk to you more about what I mean. I'm just going to draw this. And as this is getting all set up, what I want you guys to sort of think about is, when you've set before rules in your team, behavioral rules. So let's say, someone isn't, behaving the right way or doing the right thing. How do you tend to go about it in your team? How do you tend to, engage in that process? And I want you to kind of write down, just on a bit of paper, how would you actually go about doing that? Just do that for me now. Whether you're watching live or whether you're watching on a group, later, or a replay, just include that there for me, that process. How would you go about it? And as you're writing it down, I want you to reflect on, is it kind of a linear process, or is it kind of a stage-like process? Here's the way people typically go about the process like that. And by the way, I've done this before as well. So we realize that in a team of people, there's a whole set of interconnection relationships sideways between, and actually in some ways, those collective relationships are actually the power of the team. Now, what can happen over time is that either, if you think about the nature of these connections between people, either there's one or two or three people in the team, and the way they connect with each other, there's a personality conflict or a challenge, and a personality difference. And as a result of that, there's a bit of a falling out, right? And bad behavior happens as a result. So we either get sort of behavior inside the team, so kind of inter-team or intra-team as they call it, or we get behavior with our external stakeholders, so customers, suppliers, partners, and that's behavior we don't want. So what do? Our thought is, well, you know what? We need to get the team together. And what we're going to do is we're going to ask them to collectively build, let's make that a little bit neater, a set of agreements, a set of rules. And typically what this looks like is, number one, ask the team what behaviours they collectively care about. Okay. So good activity. I've done it a lot of times, but what's the result that you typically get from that? What's the result? Let's draw it. Typically what you get is like what you get when you go to the doctor. You get a prescription. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And I would say it's usually a bunch of shoulds. Okay. We should do this, should do that, should do this. Or it's usually can or can'ts. Right? We can do this, can do that, can't do this, can't do that. Now, if you think of yourself, when you think of yourself as a teenager, and because I've got a few at the moment, what happens when you get presented with can and can'ts? What's our natural human instinct for some of us if we're not inclined to follow the rules? Yeah. We either find a way to push the boundaries, to break the rules, right? Or we go into our shell. Because in this scenario, we're afraid of, there's a fear of failure or getting it wrong, right? And in this scenario, there's a desire to find out where the boundary is. So this training I've been doing this week has got me thinking a lot about how that's a broken system. So when it comes to doing, if we think about the way we do vision and values, often what we do is, because we see examples all around us where there may not be exactly our definition of it, we use really specific behavioral prescriptions to try and get control of something that is inherently uncontrollable. So there's a different way. The different way is this, which is, if you think about it, rather than prescribing every can and can't, and think about setting the boundary, right? So actually, you know what? Let's move this over here. So rather than moving from, prescriptions, let's go to being able to communicate the boundary. Okay, so in this one, it's what you can do and can't do. And in this one, it's where the boundary is. Okay, so give you an example is, might be a manufacturing organization. You might want to say you need to wear masks. That's very relevant right now, isn't it? Safety gear is mandatory. Now, that's probably not a particularly amazing example because, sometimes that is a compliant requirement. another way of saying is let's all behave in a way, if you communicate the boundary, that's safe, fair, and humane. And if you tend to create rules that look like this, people tend to think they're children and behave like them because you're telling them what to do. Children's probably an exaggeration, but you know what I mean? It creates a response, that kind of response. In this one, you give people the freedom to work it out for themselves. And it allows, the other thing about this way of doing it is it allows people to make sense of this for their own context. So both their country context, so their particular culture, or their organizational context, where they sit in the organization. Because over here, this prescriptive way inhibits that freedom and creativity. And over here, we know that people will do that anyway. And so we encourage them to make it real for themselves. All right. So underneath here, what I would love you to do is, from watching this video on creating rules and agreements, where can you apply this in your organization? What program could you apply it to where you're trying to get a behavior change? Just remember, for most people, when there's a problem around a large group of people behaving a way that you need to be different, our typical approach is to create should lists. And what they do is usually encourage those who want to push the boundary or enable people to go into their shell. I would, instead of creating should lists, communicate the boundary. Communicate at a principle level so that you enable people to work out what those principles mean for them and treat them almost like an adult in terms of their ability to implement it. I hope, I know that's been insanely useful for me this week, and I hope that's been insanely useful for you. I'm just about to put on Facebook some more information about some of the programs I'm running between now and Christmas to help get teams working in great teamwork and with clarity. Look out for those. Otherwise, have an amazing week, and I will see you soon. Cheers, guys. Bye.